A routine traffic stop on a quiet suburban night takes a dark turn when Officer Jamal Carter notices something strange. A girl in the back seat clutching her doll too tightly, her eyes silently pleading. What should have been a simple warning turns into a race against time to uncover a sinister truth. The night was unusually quiet as Officer Jamal Carter patrolled the suburban streets. The hum of the patrol car's engine and the occasional crackle of his radio were the only sounds breaking the stillness. He glanced at the dashboard clock. It had been an uneventful shift, the kind that lulls officers into a monotonous routine. But Jamal knew better than to relax. Quiet nights often had their own way of showing trouble. His headlights illuminated movement at the next intersection, an old sedan running a stop sign. The driver, either distracted or deliberately ignoring the law, made Jamal sigh as he flipped on the sirens. It wasn't a serious infraction, but a stop sign is a stop sign, and he wasn't about to let it slide. The sedan slowed down and pulled over. Jamal parked behind it, his mind running through the usual possibilities. Distracted driver, someone returning late from work, maybe a teenager testing their limits. He radioed in about the stop, his voice calm and professional. "Dispatch, this is Officer Carter. I'm stopping a dark sedan, license plate 4A3X 992, routine traffic stop. No assistance needed." As he stepped out of the car, the cool night air greeted him. His boots crunched on the pavement as he approached the driver's window. He moved with the ease of his years on the force but kept his senses sharp, scanning the vehicle for anything out of place. The window rolled down smoothly, and Jamal found himself face to face with a man who seemed too put together for this hour. He looked to be in his 40s, hair neatly combed, shirt buttoned, and an air of forced calm. "Good evening, officer," the man said with a warm, measured voice, as if he had rehearsed it. "Is everything all right?" Jamal glanced inside the car. In the back seat, a girl clutched a doll to her chest. She looked no older than 7, her blonde hair falling in loose waves over her pale face. Her small figure seemed tense, as if she wanted to disappear into the seat. She offered Jamal a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good evening," Jamal said in a neutral tone. "You ran the stop sign back there. Any reason for the hurry?" The man let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, I'm sorry. It's late and I guess I wasn't paying enough attention. Just trying to get home." Jamal nodded, not taking his eyes off the man. "License and registration, please." The man reached into the glove compartment without hesitation and handed over the requested documents. "I'm Stephen Black," he said smoothly. "And this is my daughter, Emily. We were at my sister's for a family dinner. Ran a bit late. Emily is quite tired, as you can see." Emily's head tilted slightly, as if in agreement, but her movements felt unnatural, almost robotic. Jamal noticed how her hands gripped the doll tightly, her knuckles white. When Stephen looked at her, Jamal caught a slight shiver in the girl, barely perceptible but enough to set off alarms in his mind. "Emily," Jamal said, addressing the girl directly. "Are you okay back there?" Her smile faded for a fraction of a second before she nodded. "Yes, sir," she whispered in an almost inaudible voice. Stephen quickly intervened. "She's just tired. It's been a long night. You know how it is." Jamal's eyes returned to the man. "Where do you live?" "Just outside of town," Stephen replied without hesitation. "Near Meadowbrook Lane." The answer was quick. Too quick. Jamal examined Stephen's face for a moment, noticing the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool night air. Then he looked at the license and registration. Everything was in order. The name Stephen Black, Meadowbrook Lane, registered to the vehicle. However, something didn't add up. The girl's smile seemed rehearsed, her movements stiff, her gaze never meeting his but nervously darting around the car. When Stephen's hand rested gently on her shoulder, as if to console her, Jamal noticed how Emily flinched slightly, pulling away. "Seems like you're a family man, Mr. Black," Jamal said, testing the waters. It's not common to see a father and daughter out this late around here. Stephen let out another hollow laugh. Yeah, well, not every day the dinner runs this late, but family is important, you know. Jamal gave a slight nod, keeping his tone measured. Of course. Just for future reference, make sure to come to a complete stop at the signs. It's for everyone's safety. Stephen nodded quickly. Absolutely, officer. It won't happen again. Jamal stepped away from the car still uneasy. He wanted to press further but, without any clear reason to detain them, he knew he couldn't justify holding them. All right, you can proceed. Drive safely. Thank you, officer. Have a good night, Stephen replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. As the car drove away, Jamal watched it disappear into the darkness, his hand resting unconsciously on his holster. Something about that encounter gnawed at him, honed by years on the job, the overly courteous demeanor of the man, the unsettling stillness of the girl, the slight shiver. Nothing added up. He returned to his patrol car, deep in thought, and sat in the driver's seat while pulling out his notepad to jot down the license plate. The feeling of unease in his chest didn't dissipate, and he wasn't one to ignore his intuition. He observed the empty road ahead of him. The night had regained its silence for the moment. The car was gone, but the image of Emily clutching her doll lingered in his mind. Something was wrong, and Jamal just didn't know what yet. The station was quiet when Jamal Carter returned. The hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional ring of a phone broke the stillness. It was almost 9:30 p.m., and most of the night shift was either out on patrol or buried in paperwork. Jamal sat at his desk but couldn't focus on the reports piled in front of him. His mind kept returning to the encounter with Stephen Black and the girl in the back seat. Something didn't add up, and he couldn't let it go. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as he replayed the scene in his mind. The overly polished behavior of Stephen, the rigid posture of the girl, her pale face, and that faint smile that seemed more like a mask than a genuine expression. The way she avoided eye contact, the way her fingers clutched the doll like a lifeline. It all seemed wrong. But wrong wasn't enough to act on, not yet. He opened his notepad and flipped to the page where he had jotted down the license plate of the sedan. 4A3X. 992. He looked at it for a moment before typing it into the state database. As the system processed the search, he tapped his pen on the desk, feeling the unease growing in his chest. The results appeared on the screen. Registered to Stephen Black, address Meadowbrook Lane, no prior arrests or citations. On paper, Stephen was clean, an average citizen. But Jamal knew appearances could be deceiving. Will Jamal be able to stop Stephen and save Emily in time? Like this video if you want to find out, and comment on where you're watching from. The wheels of Jamal Carter's patrol car rolled through the quiet streets as he dialed his partner's number on the phone, gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. Dispatch had already confirmed that the Amber Alert matched the girl he had seen in the sedan. Seemed more like a mask than a genuine expression. The way she avoided eye contact, the way her fingers clutched the doll like a lifeline. It all seemed wrong. But wrong wasn't enough to act on. Not yet. He opened his notepad and flipped to the page where he had jotted down the license plate of the sedan. 4A3X. 992. He looked at it for a moment before typing it into the state database. As the system processed the search, he tapped his pen on the desk, feeling the unease growing in his chest. The results appeared on the screen. Registered to Stephen Black, address Meadowbrook Lane, no prior arrests or citations. On paper, Stephen was clean, an average citizen. But Jamal knew appearances could be deceiving. Will Jamal be able to stop Stephen and save Emily in time? Like this video if you want to find out, and comment on where you're watching from. The wheels of Jamal Carter's patrol car rolled through the quiet streets as he dialed his partner's number on the phone, gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. Dispatch had already confirmed that the Amber Alert matched the girl he had seen in the sedan. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity, each second bringing Emily closer to disappearing forever. "Detective, miss." Sarah answered on the second ring with her usual firm tone. "Sarah, it's Jamal," he said, his voice tense. "We have a problem. I stopped a sedan tonight. The driver's name is Stephen Black. In the back seat there was a white blonde girl about 7 years old. Something seemed off, but I let them go. I ran the plates and checked the dashcam footage. Turns out the girl matches an active Amber Alert. Emily Harper, missing from our field 3 days ago." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Sarah responded with a tone filled with urgency. "Are you telling me you let her go, Jamal?" He gritted his teeth, feeling guilty. "I didn't have anything solid to hold them on at the time. But now we know Stephen Black has a history linked to child abductions. Although he's never been formally charged, he's our guy, Sarah." Sarah let out a frustrated sigh. "Damn it, Jamal. Alright, send me everything you have: license plate, address, vehicle description. I'll contact the R-Field team immediately. We need to move fast." "I'm sending you the dashcam images and my report," Jamal said as he typed on his computer inside the car. Dispatch had already issued a bulletin, but he doubted Stephen would return to the address on file if he was as cunning as he seemed. He wouldn't go home, knowing he was being pursued. Sarah's tone became more serious. "Then we don't have time to waste. I'll review his file to see if he has any family, associates, or places he frequents. He has a pattern." "He's slippery," Jamal replied. "He's been linked to similar cases in several states but has never been caught. He knows how to stay under the radar." "Not for much longer," Sarah said with determination. "We'll see you at the station in 20 minutes. We'll coordinate the search with our field there." "I'm on my way," Jamal said, ending the call and hitting the accelerator. At the station, the tension was palpable as Jamal and Sarah reviewed Stephen Black's file. It was a frustrating mix of vague connections and near misses. Stephen had been questioned in several states, always in relation to missing children, but had never been formally charged. He was slippery, methodical, and too good at covering his tracks. "He has a pattern," Sarah said, flipping through the file. "He usually targets public places, parks, playgrounds where kids can wander off unsupervised. Then they disappear. He keeps them for a few days, and by the time the police get close, he's vanished." Jamal looked over her shoulder, his jaw clenched. "He won't vanish this time," he said. "Not on my watch." Sarah looked up, her expression unreadable. "You're taking this personally." "Of course I am," Jamal replied in a low but intense voice. "I had her right in front of me, Sarah. She was there and I let her go. Me. I won't let him slip away again." Sarah sighed, softening her tone. "I understand, but blaming yourself won't help find her. We need to focus. If he's on the move with her, we need to think like him. Where would he go? What would his next step be?" Jamal ran a hand over his face, trying to calm the frustration he felt. If he's been doing this for years, he has a system. He won't risk anything. He probably has a predetermined location, some isolated place where he knows he won't be bothered. "All right," Sarah nodded in agreement. "Let's check out his address on Meadowbrook Lane. It's a long shot, but we should also look into motels, rest stops, and isolated properties he might use." Jamal scanned the map Sarah had opened on the computer. "And our field, if he abducted her there, he might still have some contact in the area." "Good idea," Sarah said. "I'll talk to the R-Field police to see if they have any leads on associates or places he frequents." Sarah's phone vibrated, and she quickly read the message. "The R-Field police just identified an old hunting cabin about a mile from here. It belongs to Stephen's uncle but hasn't been used in years. It might be worth checking out." Jamal stood up, grabbing his jacket. "I'm heading there." "I'm coming with you," Sarah said, grabbing her keys. The drive to the cabin was tense. The narrow, unpaved dirt road was overgrown with weeds, and the headlights barely illuminated the darkness. When the cabin finally came into view, it was a dilapidated wooden structure that looked like it might collapse at any moment. Jamal and Sarah parked a short distance away and approached on foot with flashlights in hand. The windows were boarded up, and the front door hung slightly off its hinges. Jamal's heart pounded as he stepped onto the creaking porch. "Dispatch, this is Detective Miss," Sarah said into her radio. "We're at the location. Proceeding with caution." "Understood," the dispatcher's voice replied. Jamal pushed open the door, his flashlight cutting through the dusty gloom inside. The interior was empty, with furniture covered in dust and cobwebs in every corner. It didn't look like anyone had been there in years. "Nothing," Sarah murmured, sweeping her flashlight beam around the room. "If he has a system, he's already one step ahead." Jamal's frustration intensified. "We're running out of time. Let's regroup and review his last known movements. Maybe he's close to where you first encountered him. People like him don't stray far from their comfort zones." "Then let's start there," Jamal said, his mind racing. The neighborhood was eerily quiet when Jamal Carter parked his patrol car on the corner where he had stopped Stephen Black hours earlier. The porch lights flickered weakly in the night, casting faint shadows on the sidewalk. Jamal got out of the car, his boots crunching on the gravel as he looked around. He had let Emily go, looked her in the eyes, and let her disappear into the night with a man he now knew was a predator. He wouldn't make that mistake again. He walked down the block, knocking on several doors, hoping someone had seen something. Most of the neighbors were reluctant to open their doors so late, observing him warily through cracks or windows. Finally, an elderly woman wrapped in a fleece robe cracked open her door just enough to see him. "I'm sorry to bother you at this hour, ma'am," Jamal began, showing his badge. "I'm Officer Carter. I'm investigating a case involving a missing girl. Have you seen a dark sedan driven by a white man in his 40s with a girl about 7 years old with blonde hair?" The woman furrowed her brow, thinking. "I believe so. It was parked right there," she said, pointing to the curb near her house. "I didn't think much of it, but the driver was looking around as if making sure no one saw him. The little girl in the back seat caught my attention. She looked scared." Jamal's pulse quickened. "Did you see where they went?" "No, but the girl in the back seat stood out to me," the woman continued. "She seemed frightened. Poor thing. I thought it was strange, but I didn't want to assume anything." Jamal nodded, his fears confirmed. "Thank you, ma'am. If you remember anything else, please call me." He gave her his card and returned to the patrol car, his mind racing. Stephen hadn't just been moving around aimlessly. There was a calculated pattern to his stops. But what connection did he have to that neighborhood? As he got into his car, the radio crackled. "Officer Carter, this is dispatch. We received a tip from a waitress at a diner south of your location. She reports seeing a man matching Stephen Black's description with a girl tonight." He seemed agitated, and the girl looked distressed. Jamal leaned toward the microphone. "What's the address?" The dispatcher gave him the address, a roadside diner near the highway, not far from where Stephen was last seen. Jamal entered the address into the GPS and hit the gas, feeling the adrenaline burn in his chest. He was getting closer, but every second counted. Jamal arrived at the gas station where he had stopped earlier to retrace Stephen's steps. The fluorescent lights shone brightly over the empty lot, casting harsh shadows on the cement. Inside, a young employee leaned against the counter, looking at his phone. Jamal entered, showing his badge. "Good evening," he said in a firm tone. "I'm Officer Carter. I need to ask you some questions." The employee straightened up, putting his phone in his pocket. "Sure, officer. What's this about?" "I'm looking for someone who might have passed through here tonight," Jamal began. "A dark sedan, older model. White man in his 40s, traveling with a girl about 7 years old, blonde Have you seen them? The employee furrowed his brow, thinking. Yeah, actually they were here a few hours ago, maybe around 7. He filled up the tank and bought a couple of snacks. The girl had a doll she wouldn't let go of. What about the man? Jamal asked urgently. Did he say or do anything unusual? The young man hesitated. He seemed off, like he was in a hurry but trying to hide it. The girl dropped her doll as she was getting out, and when she bent down to pick it up, he yelled at her, called her stupid. She didn't say anything, just took the doll and got back in the car. Jamal felt a knot in his stomach as he imagined Emily's trembling hands clutching her doll and avoiding her abductor's gaze. Did you notice which direction they went? Yeah, they took Pine Street heading south toward the highway. Jamal took out his notepad, jotting down the details. Thank you. If you remember anything else, please call me. He gave the employee his card and left, the cool night air hitting him like a slap. He leaned against the hood of his patrol car, his mind racing. Stephen Black wasn't just a predator. He was a ticking time bomb. The tension in Emily's posture and the way she recoiled from Stephen spoke volumes. Before he could leave, his radio crackled again. Officer Carter, this is dispatch. The waitress at the diner has more details. The man seemed agitated and mentioned something about needing a place to stay for the night. He's likely still in the area. Jamal straightened up, his pulse quickening. Location. The dispatcher gave him the diner's address. Jamal took off immediately, not activating the siren to avoid alerting Stephen. The road ahead appeared dark and empty, with only the occasional car passing in the opposite direction. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he approached the location. It was a diner not far from the highway, the perfect spot for someone like Stephen. Just outside of town near the highway, but isolated enough not to draw attention. As he pulled up, the neon "Open 24 hours" sign glowed in the night. Jamal parked and scanned the lot. A few cars scattered haphazardly, none matching Stephen's. He got out of the patrol car, his boots crunching on the gravel as he headed toward the door, his heart pounding with adrenaline and determination. The bell above the diner door chimed softly as Jamal Carter entered. The aroma of coffee and fried food enveloped him, and the fluorescent lights buzzed, illuminating the nearly empty establishment. Behind the counter, a middle-aged waitress with dark circles under her eyes and a name tag reading Linda looked up from wiping the counter. "You must be the officer," she said, recognizing him. "I called about the man with the girl." Jamal nodded, his attention sharp. "That's right. I'm Officer Carter. Tell me everything you saw." Linda put down the rag, crossing her arms. "They came in a couple of hours ago." He ordered coffee and a burger, but the way he talked to the girl wasn't right. She looked scared, fidgeting with her doll. He snapped at her when she wouldn't sit still, told her to act normal. The poor thing didn't say a word, just stared at her plate. Jamal clenched his jaw. Did he say anything relevant? About where he was going? She nodded. Yeah, at one point he was on the phone, said something about needing a place to stay for the night. There's a motel just down the highway, the Lakeview Inn. It's a dump, but it's the closest. He seemed in a hurry. Linda hesitated. Not exactly, but he kept checking the door like he was paranoid someone would see him. Thank you, Jamal said, handing her his card. If you remember anything else, please call me. Linda nodded, her face etched with concern. Find that girl, please. She didn't look safe with him. Jamal gave her a reassuring nod and left, the adrenaline surging as he stepped outside. He grabbed his radio. Sarah, I've got a lead. Stephen might be staying at the Lakeview Inn near the highway. It's the closest motel, and the waitress said he needed a place to stay. I'm on my way, Sarah replied. Meet you there in 10. Jamal got back into his patrol car and hit the gas, keeping the sirens off to avoid alerting Stephen. The road stretched out before him, dark and desolate except for the occasional glow of streetlights. His hands remained steady on the wheel, his mind focused. Emily was out there somewhere, and he wouldn't fail her again. The Lakeview Inn was as grimy as Linda had described. The parking lot was cracked, with weeds growing through the fissures, and a few cars parked haphazardly, their windows fogged up. The single-story building showed peeling paint and dim lights in the doorways of each room. Jamal spotted Sarah's unmarked car at the far end of the lot and pulled up beside her. He got out, his pulse racing as he approached her window. Sarah rolled it down, her face tense. "I spoke to the clerk," she said. "Stephen's car is here. He checked into room 12 about 30 minutes ago." Jamal's eyes darted to the far end of the motel, where a faint light filtered through the curtains of room 12. "Is the girl with him?" Sarah nodded grimly. "The clerk says she is." She looked scared, but Stephen said she was just tired. Jamal clenched his fists. The image of Emily's terrified face burned into his mind. "We can't wait any longer. We have to act." Sarah put a hand on his arm. "Jamal, we need to be cautious. If we go in hot, he might panic and hurt her. Let's watch and wait for an opportunity." Reluctantly, Jamal nodded. They took cover in the shadows across from the room, their eyes fixed on the partially drawn curtains. Inside, Stephen paced back and forth, agitated and restless. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, clutching her doll. Even from a distance, Jamal could see the tension in her small body. Her shoulders hunched as if she wanted to disappear. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity as they watched Stephen, who couldn't stop murmuring and gesturing erratically. Jamal contained his impatience, every fiber of his being wanting to burst in and take Emily away. But he forced himself to wait. Finally, Stephen grabbed a pack of cigarettes and headed for the door. Jamal's heart leaped. "This is our chance," Sarah whispered. They watched as Stephen stepped outside, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He stood on the tiny porch, oblivious to the officers hidden in the shadows. Jamal exchanged a glance with Sarah, who nodded. "Now," she said. Jamal moved swiftly and silently, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. Stephen didn't notice his approach until it was too late. Jamal grabbed him from behind, twisting his arms to handcuff him. "Stephen Black, you're under arrest," Jamal said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "We'll sort this out at the station." Stephen spat on the ground, glaring at them with wild eyes. "You don't know what you're doing. You're making a mistake." Ignoring his protests, Jamal led him to the patrol car, leaving Sarah to secure the room. But before they could breathe a sigh of relief, a loud noise came from the woods behind the motel, a crunching sound that made Jamal freeze. "What the hell was that?" Sarah murmured, her hand going to her gun. Jamal turned sharply, his eyes scanning the tree line. "Stay with him. I'll check it out." But before Jamal could move, Emily darted out of the room, her small figure running toward the woods. "Emily!" Jamal shouted, his voice cutting through the night. She didn't stop, her frantic steps fading into the darkness, and within seconds, she disappeared among the trees. Jamal's stomach churned as he prepared to follow her, but another movement caught his attention, a shadow slipping along the edge of the woods. A figure emerged from the shadows, lunging at Jamal with a knife. Jamal reacted instinctively, dodging the blade as it slashed through the air mere inches from his chest. He grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisting it until the knife clattered to the ground. But the man fought back, shoving Jamal against a tree. A sharp pain shot through his back, but he stayed on his feet, grappling with the assailant. "Stop!" Jamal ordered, trying to keep his voice steady despite the adrenaline. The attacker didn't respond, instead lunging at Jamal with renewed ferocity. Jamal sidestepped, using the man's momentum against him, and sent him crashing to the ground. He pinned the man down, his knee pressing into his back. "Emily, run!" Jamal shouted. The girl hesitated for a moment, her eyes wide with fear, before turning and fleeing deeper into the woods. Jamal let out a sigh of relief but knew he couldn't let his guard down. He reached for his radio with his free hand, but the man struggled beneath him, almost breaking free. Jamal gritted his teeth, his arm aching as he managed to grab the handcuffs and secure the man's wrists behind his back. "Who are you?" Jamal demanded, his voice filled with fury. "Why are you helping that man?" The man didn't respond, his face contorted in a grimace. Jamal shook him, losing patience. "Talk!" The man only laughed, a deep, menacing sound. Jamal ignored the taunt and dragged him to his feet, hauling him back toward the motel. His arm throbbed, and blood trickled down his sleeve, but he didn't care. He just wanted to find Emily and make sure she was safe. As they approached the edge of the woods, Jamal saw Emily emerge from behind a tree, still clutching her doll. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears. "It's okay, Emily," Jamal said softly, approaching her. "You're safe now." The girl hesitated for a moment before running to him, clinging to his uniform. Jamal scooped her up with one arm, holding her close while keeping a firm grip on the handcuffed attacker with the other. He felt Emily's trembling slowly subside as she relaxed in his arms. Meanwhile, Sarah appeared, gun in hand, ready to take custody of the accomplice. "Are you okay?" she asked Jamal, her eyes scanning the blood on his arm. "I'll survive," he replied, his gaze fixed on Emily. "Let's just get her out of here." The fluorescent light of the police station was cold and sterile. Stephen Black sat slumped in the interrogation room, handcuffed to the metal table. His expression was defiant, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his lips. Beside him, his accomplice looked visibly shaken, avoiding everyone's gaze. Both were surrounded by their lawyers, but the mountain of evidence was overwhelming. Detective Sarah Miss sat across from Stephen, her arms crossed and her gaze fixed on him. "You're wasting your time," Stephen spat arrogantly. "Emily is my daughter. You're all going to look very stupid when you realize that." Sarah didn't flinch, having seen men like him before, predators who hid their vileness behind masks of charm and lies. She opened a folder and slid a photo of Emily across the table. "This is Emily Harper," she said coldly. "She's 7 years old, abducted 3 days ago from her backyard in Meadowville. Her parents are desperate. By the way, can you explain how she ended up in your car?" Stephen leaned back in his chair, the handcuffs clinking against the table. "I already told you she's my daughter. She came with me willingly." Sarah, 22, slammed her hand on the table, the sound echoing in the small room. "Enough with the lies. We have everything, Stephen. The girl is terrified. She didn't come with you willingly. You're a monster who preys on children." Stephen's face darkened, the smirk disappearing. "You don't understand anything. You think you're so smart, but you have no idea. 2239. How the world works. Those girls, they're not." Sarah cut him off, her voice icy. "Don't you dare try to justify this. They are children, not commodities. Sober, Stephen. The sooner you admit it, the better." Stephen's eyes flashed with anger, but Sarah continued, her voice unyielding. "We have evidence to bury you and your accomplice. You're both going down." Stephen slumped in his chair, the defiance in his eyes replaced by a flicker of fear. In the observation room next door, Jamal Carter watched through the one-way mirror, his hands clenched at his sides. He resisted the urge to storm in and confront Stephen directly, knowing he had to stay calm. Emily was safe, and now it was time to make sure Stephen and his accomplice paid for what they had done. He turned to the table behind him, where the evidence seized from the motel lay. Forged documents, fake birth certificates, driver's licenses, and custody papers, all meticulously created to make it seem like Stephen was the legal guardian of Emily. They had also found several passports hidden under the floorboards of the motel room, each with different names and photos of various children that didn't match the printed names. But the most chilling discovery was a notebook filled with codes and sums of money, a macabre ledger of transactions that pointed to a child trafficking network. "This guy has been at this for years," Sarah had said when she first saw that notebook. "And he's not acting alone." In the interrogation room, Sarah didn't let up. We found the passports, Stephen. Dozens of them, all with pictures of children who aren't yours. And the notebook, it's a clear record of what you do. You abduct them, forge the documents to pass them off as your own, and then sell them. How many children have you handed over like this, Stephen? How many families have you destroyed? Stephen's face tensed, but he remained silent. As for his accomplice, Sarah continued, we caught him red-handed in the woods. He's got scratches and bruises. Your plan fell apart. Every second you stay silent only makes your defense harder. Talk, Stephen. Stephen finally cracked, slamming his fists on the table. You don't know anything, he shouted. You think you're heroes, but you don't understand how the real world works. Those kids, they're not. Don't you dare. Sarah cut him off, her voice sharp. They are children. It's over. Jamal watched from the observation room, his rage barely contained. He thought of Emily, her pale face, her doll clutched tightly, the terror in her eyes. He had saved her, but she was just one of many victims. He took a deep breath, knowing that with Stephen and his accomplice captured, they could bring down more members of the network. It would be a long process, but this time they wouldn't escape. Sarah exited the interrogation room, her expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. He's not talking about the bigger operation, but we have enough to charge him with Emily's abduction and at least a dozen other counts based on the passports and forged documents. And the accomplice? Jamal asked, his voice grave. Sarah sighed. He's not saying much either, but the evidence links them both. It's a start, but it's not enough. It's not enough. Jamal agreed, his voice heavy. There are more children, more families who don't even know if their kids are still alive. Sarah put a hand on his shoulder. We'll find them, Jamal. But we need to build an airtight case. If we rush in without solid evidence, we could blow it and let the bigger fish slip away. Jamal exhaled, trying to calm himself. She was right. They needed to construct a case that was impossible to dismantle, ensuring not only Stephen and his accomplice went down but the entire network behind them. A short while later, as Stephen and his accomplice were led out of the station in handcuffs, Jamal watched them with a cold stare. The usual air of superiority Stephen had was gone, replaced by an expression of defeat. His accomplice kept his head down, the hood still hiding his face. Jamal's chest tightened as he thought of the notebook, the photos, and the names of children who hadn't been as lucky as Emily. He promised himself he wouldn't stop until he found them all. You did a great job, Carter, Sarah said, standing beside him. Emily is safe because of you. Jamal shook his head. It's not enough. There are more children, and I won't stop until they're all safe. Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with determination. We will. We'll bring them down one by one. The next morning, Jamal Carter stood in the observation room of the police station, watching Emily Harper as she spoke with a child psychologist. The little girl still clutched her doll, the same one she had held onto so tightly during the entire ordeal. Her small frame seemed even more fragile in the daylight, but there was a quiet strength in the way she sat, her fingers tracing the worn seams of the doll's dress. Jamal knew all too well how trauma left invisible scars that could take years to heal. But seeing Emily there, safe, was something he would never forget. She was there because he hadn't given up, because he had trusted his instincts. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Detective Sarah Miss, holding 2 cups of coffee. She set one down in front of him and took a seat across the table. You okay? She asked, studying him with concern. Jamal sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. I should be. Emily is safe, and that's what matters. But Sarah invited him to continue with a look. But it's not enough, he admitted. Stephen and his accomplice were just pieces of a much larger network. Emily is lucky, but there are other children out there, in who knows what conditions. Sarah nodded grimly. You're right. This is just the beginning, but we will dismantle it, piece by piece.